Straight up to the code editor now. Let's get to see the FlexBox in action. My screen right now is split into two parts. On the left side is the code editor. As you can see, it's relatively blank. There's no single element within the body tags, and there's no single style within the style tags. Over to the right hand side of the screen is the browser, which gets to show us the outcome of what we're coding on a step-by-step basis. Now, we're taking the FlexBox model from the scratch. We mentioned categorically that for a container to have the features or stunts of FlexBox, the display property has to be set to a display property or a display type of flex. That is what gives it control over its child elements, as you can see on the screen right now. Let's talk less and code more. Let's get started from the scratch. Within the body element, we want to create a container, a parent container that has 3 child elements. So we're going to use a div to represent all of these. Our first div will be a div.parent. So that's a div with a class of parent. Then the 3 child elements will be div elements as well. So we'll give div.1, div.2, and div.3. Good. Inside of the children divs, let's put a h1 to identify them. Let's call this child 1 or first child, h1 and the second child div, and call it second child. And we'll do the same thing for the third div and say third child. Good. See that on our screen already? Let's just do a basic styling of the elements we have on our web page right now, these 3 child elements. How we get to select them or identify them from the HTML side of things is the parent div actually contains the 3 child elements: child with a class name of 1, child class 2, and child class 3. So to select them for styling based on CSS selector, we'll use the parent class name to select the divs. Let me show you what I mean. .parent div. What this means is all the divs inside of the parent element, which is all 3 of them. So whatever style we apply now so whatever style we key in at this point would reflect upon all 3 child divs. Let's go with a height first, a height of 200 pixels. Good. That's a height of 200 pixels on all 3 child divs. Now, let's give them each their own background color. Since we want to give the background color distinctively to each one of them, we're not going to use div as a selector this time around. We're going to use their individual class names. For the first child div, the class is .1, the second .2, and the third .3. This is what I mean. .1, background color of red. That's it right there. .2, background color of dodgy blue. That's it right there. .3, background color of lime. That's it right there. Looks like a flag, right? Let's say the height is too much. Let's reduce the height of all the divs from 200 to 150 pixels. Good. There's one thing I want you to notice. These divs are block level elements. That is why, as the background color shows, they run across the full length. They take the full width of the screen or the full width of the container they are placed in. The full width of the screen or the full width of the container they are placed in, because they are block level elements. They can only stack one on top of the other and not side by side because they are block level elements. We'll get to the point where we can make them yield into stacking side by side by activating the parent element with a display property of flex. Over now to the parent of these three child divs, which is the container housing them. We're going to style the parent to visualize it on our web page. The class name for the is simply parent, so we'll go with dot parent. To visualize it, let's give it a border of 7 pixels solid orange. That's the orange border. That's the parent container. The height of the parent container right now is the total height of its 3 children divs. Okay, if we want the height of the container to go way more than that, to take up the full height of the screen, we'll set the height of the parent to 100 VH, which is 100 vertical height of the screen. The orange border of the parent container now goes full height of the screen, while the children adjust from here to the top. Okay. The 3 child elements are stacked one on top of the other. If we want them to lay side by side of each other, we simply set the parent element to a display property of flex. So let's go over to the parent element now and set the display to flex. See what happens. The 3 elements now stack or lay beside themselves on a horizontal fashion. That's quite simple, right? Correct. At this point, the 3 child elements are laying side by side, but they are squished to the left end of the screen. That's why we have this white space here. The parent elements can have further control over them, giving them a command to spread out across the screen. The parent element gets to do that with a justify content property of space between. Now the 3 child elements are spread apart. Yeah, they're spread apart with space in between them, but there's no space around them. In order to set the child elements such that there's both space between them and space around them, use the same justify content property, but this time set its value to space around instead of space between. Space around. Now, the 3 child elements have both space between them and space around them to the left and to the right. Good. They can also be made to lay in the middle part of the screen. They should squish themselves together and stay in the center of the screen. That can be done with the same justify content property by setting its value this time around to justify content center. They are now together in the center or the middle part of the screen. Seeing how the justify content command of the parent makes these child elements to either be together or spread apart, of which case, let's recap. Justify content space between sends them spread wide apart with no space around them, while the option of justify content space around makes them have space around themselves from left to right. Okay, and lastly, the justify content property of center makes them come together in the middle part of the screen horizontally. Now that is horizontal effects. How about vertical effects? In which case we want these child elements to be in the middle or the bottom of the screen. What do? We use not the justify content, rather we use the align items property. Let's backtrack and set the align items property of these children elements to flex end. Flex end. Flex end sends the child elements right down to the bottom of the screen. If you want them to be in the middle of the screen, we use the align items property of center. That takes them to the middle of the screen. But by default, if you want them to be at the top side of the screen, align items property of flex start takes them to the top. Now, pause for a second and observe carefully the next move we're about to take. It's going to be a combination of the align items property and the justify content property. Watch out. I'm going to backtrack one more time and remove all these commands, we're left with just the display property of flex for the parent elements. Let's say we want these child elements to be centered vertically and horizontally at the same time, in which case they will now be at the very middle of the screen. How do we do that? We use both the align items property and justify content property. First, we'll set the justify content to center and align items also to center. See what happens. Now, the three child elements are all together in the middle of the screen, centered vertically and horizontally at the same time with these properties. First, the parent is set to display of flex. That is normal initialization. Second, the justify content property is set to center. That centers the elements horizontally. And lastly, the align items property are set to center, which now also centers these three elements vertically. So we've achieved perfect centering of these child elements in the middle of the screen, justifiably so. I'm going to pause it or hold it right here for now. Let these properties sink right into you. It is very, very key.